Hey yo, what's up? It's Alex from MPE Music, and today we're going to talk about Equator 2, which is a synth made by Roli. It's a versatile MPE synth from the same company who created all the Roli MIDI controllers, which are very popular. But we're going to talk about, is it worth it? What can it do? And what does it sound like? So we're going to cover all these things in this video. Hey yo, it's Alex from MPE Music. You know the drill. With this channel, it's my mission to help musicians produce themselves by developing their mindset, expanding their creativity, and connecting to their inner artist in a deeper way. And sometimes connecting to your inner artist involves plugins, tools, fun instruments, cool new sounds, all that fun stuff. All right, so this is what Equator 2 looks like. It's purple. I'm wearing a purple shirt. I got a purple track loaded up into Ableton, so we're feeling purple today. Yeah, what I want to do today is kind of go over some of the powerful features, what sets this synth apart from other synths, where does it shine? I'm going to show you some of the sounds, talk about some of my favorite features, and then I'll recap everything towards the end of this video to see if this is a good fit for you, if it might be the right choice for you or not. All right, so first of all, let's talk about some of the main features of this synth. And I think one of the big things about Equator 2 is it prides itself on being an MPE enabled synth, which if you don't know what MPE is, I made a whole other video about it, so you can check that out. I'll leave it in the description below. But basically MPE enables a bunch of new modes of expression if you have an MPE controller, and Roli also creates MPE controllers such as this Roli C-block and the light pad block and a bunch of other ones as well. So first and foremost, I think that's one of the most attractive things of the synth is that it is fully MPE enabled and it's designed and created by a company that creates MPE controllers. Aside from that, I gotta say that a lot of the presets in Equator 2 are pretty damn amazing. There's like 1,400 presets. Some I like more than others. And I'll demo some of these presets real quick just so you can get a little taste. But I gotta say that they did a great job in designing a lot of the presets. So if you're more into like checking out presets and then finding sounds you like and then maybe tweaking them from there, there's a plethora of amazing options to start out from, especially the textured sounds and the acoustic sampled instruments. I'll give you a taste in a little bit here. But if you're into more sound design, it has a lot of power, as you would expect under the hood, to really get in nitty-gritty details of sound design, and we'll touch on that as well in this video. All right, but the only thing is it worth the steep price? Because I think this is about $200 or so. It's not cheap, but it has some really cool MPE tech capabilities. It has some sick presets. It sounds good. It has a lot of options, but is it worth it? Because there's other synths such as Vital that start off free and that are a lot more cost effective. But I gotta say, if you have like Ableton 11, which is MPE compatible, and you're into MPE stuff, it's part of your workflow, you're interested in it, then Equator 2 could be a contender for sure. And before we dive into some of the sounds, I gotta mention, I can't not mention Vital. Like when you're thinking about getting a synth, Vital is free to start out and it is a lot more cost effective and it does sound great. So if you're just getting started out with synthesis, I actually made another whole video kind of going over the basic features, the basic characteristics and components behind synthesis using Vital, which is a free synth. So if you're interested in checking that out or you want to learn more about synthesis before diving into this one, definitely check out that video. I'll link it in the description below as well. But all in all, you can't really go wrong with any of these modern synths that you choose. It's just about choosing the right one for your needs. All right, so let's go ahead and check out some sounds that this thing can do. So there you have it. There's some of the sounds that you'll see inside the presets of Equator 2, and there's 1,400 presets, so there's so many to explore. Some of them are MPE enabled by default, some are not, so you can use them with any old MIDI controller. And yeah, I really like the textured presets, the sound design ones, and the ones that sample acoustic instruments. I feel like those definitely shine above the rest. So let's go to like the basic new preset mode. And that's just a standard sawtooth wave. And so let's start off by taking a deeper look at the wavetables and the oscillator engines. So you have 6 different oscillators that you can turn on and off right here. That's a lot. All right, so first off, you get this cool view of the waveform, which is fine and everything, but I feel it's a little bit counterintuitive because right off the bat, you don't really know how to change the waveform shape unless you know to click on this drop down. And then now you can access all these different waveform shapes. Right, this is also a single cycle waveform. There's some more wavetables. All right, so here's a wavetable, but off the bat, like once you change this, you don't know how to adjust the wavetable. You have to actually double click on the oscillator, and then it will bring up your more in-depth control. So here you can change your wavetable position. You get your detune and your unison, right, to thicken up your sound. So that's slightly counterintuitive to find all that stuff, but once you know where it is, it's not that big a deal. And then on this little menu, you can also do FM synthesis. So this is basically combining 2 synthesizers together or affecting this wavetable with another oscillator. So you can do that here, and then you can also add some ring modulation as well. All right, and on these oscillators, you have 4 different engines, okay? You have a wavetable, which we just explored. You get your single cycle waveforms like your sawtooth, your square wave, your sine wave, but you also get your wavetables that you can have adjustable positions and have more unique, complex sounds. You have a sampler. So if you don't have something like Ableton that has a built-in sampler and simpler, which is epic, then you might want to consider getting this synth to play around with samples at a higher level of detail, because you can load in your own samples here. You get all these different samples. I'm pretty sure there's a lot of samples of old school synths and all sorts of different instruments that you can use built in, but you can also load in your own samples. You can load in your own samples by dropping them in here. But I gotta say, a lot of the built-in samples in Equator 2 do sound amazing. Here's a Rhodes sound. Moving on, you also have the granular engine, which I think is extremely powerful, and it's probably one of the best features of Equator 2, and we'll get into that in a little bit. And then you get noise generators. So the granular engine is what you'll use to get a lot of that texture, a lot of that like particle stuff, and it sounds amazing. And it's really neat when you start using the granular engine with FM synthesis with other wavetables. You can get some really interesting results really quick. And then finally, we have a noise generator. So this is just you want to add pink noise, white noise, whatever it may be, to layer your sound, or use this again in FM to really manipulate your sounds in creative ways. All right, so I'm going to go back to the wavetable. And I want to talk about the granular engine here. So I'm going to turn on another oscillator. And what I want to do is do some FM synthesis with this granular engine into the wavetable. So I'm going to click here to our wavetable, and then we're going to go source 3, and we're going to go the amount, and you can get some crazy interesting results because now we're using the granular engine with the wavetable to affect the sound. You can get some crazy sounds. All All right, next let's talk about MPE, which I gotta say is probably Equator 2's biggest feature. And you'll see the MPE features in the center right here. And I gotta say, like I'm a rocker, I play guitar, and the fact that I can have a MIDI controller that reacts to how I play it, meaning how hard I press it and where I move my fingers and how I manipulate it, and the fact that I can change what that manipulation does to the sound with the MPE controls is probably the biggest feature for me, and that's why I love the synth. But and I got to be honest, like I don't dive too deep into the in-depth routing. We'll take a look at that, but that's not really the biggest use that I use it for. I use it mainly for this MPE control, so I can be very physical and play around with all these sounds with this controller. So right here, you'll see all of the typical MPE controls, the strike, glide, slide, press, and lift, which you can all map to whatever parameter you want. And if you're not familiar with any of this MPE stuff, I made a whole video dedicated to MPE, so definitely check that out if you're interested. All right, so let's say I wanted to map the pressure, so how hard I push on my MIDI controller to, let's say, the wavetable position. All I would do is click this little menu so that it lights up in these beautiful LEDs, and then click the parameter I want to modulate, and you have to get these special arrows, and then you can scroll up to select the amount. And now, depending on how hard I push this controller, it's going to affect the wavetable position. Right? You can have all sorts of fun with this kind of mapping to an MPE controller. Right? Let's say I want to map the slide feature, so moving up and down on my MIDI controller to the filter. So all I do is click the slide, highlight it, and then let's go to the cutoff frequency right here. Boom. So now as I slide up on my MIDI controller, it's affecting the filter cutoff position. You can even adjust the sensitivity and the curves of how the sound reacts once you perform the action, all sorts of crazy things. And if you don't have an MPE enabled MIDI controller, no problem. You can just click this standard tab, and then you can map all of these more standard MIDI controls from your standard MIDI controller to all sorts of parameters across the synth. All right, next, let's talk about routing. And routing is pretty intuitive, but it's not perfect in Equator 2, in my opinion, because to map anything, you have to click on it. So let's say we want LFO1, we click, highlight this, and then you have to click on the parameter. So let's say we want it to be the pan. So you have to hover over the parameter until those arrows show up, and then you click and you scroll up. And now when I play, the panning should go left and right. Right, but you got to play around with the positioning to make sure it does what you want it to do. And this is pretty standard, but it took me a while to figure that out, to be honest. For most people, like unless you're getting really in depth with sound design, this is going to be enough, but it can be tricky if you want to like LFO an LFO, right? Because you can't click on this and then go in here and click on something. You might have to click this menu to bring them all up, and then click the LFO here, and then click, let's say, the frequency here. So if you want to LFO and LFO, there's a few more steps involved. And keep in mind, there is a whole routing tab. So if you notice up here, there's your synth tab, which is your main synth workstation, like you see here. But you also have a routing tab, which is more in depth for routing. You can route filters to each other. You can change the way they're routed, whether it's in parallel, standard, mixed, whatever, all sorts of different routing possibilities. And you can even go as far as to click the modulation matrix here, and then you'll have all of your various parameters laid out. And you can also add new destinations. So you can find pretty much anything here, find it, and then add it as a source. So like LFO 3, right? The frequency. So it's added there. This is the destination. So let's say we want to affect that. And then you find the, let's say the pitch of a sound, pitch 1 to the LFO 3 frequency. And you can add new connection, and that'll pop up in the modulation matrix. And this is if you really want to get in the weeds with sound design and mapping all sorts of things. Everything is pretty much possible, but it does take a bit of extra work to set it up. So if you really want to dive into the sound design and get nerdy and get nitty gritty and like create universes, it is all under the hood. And before diving into the effects tab, I actually want to jump back to the synth tab, and let's go back here and talk about just the standard features you'll see. First and foremost, you want to see your envelopes. So you have your standard amplitude envelope here that can change the attack, decay, sustain, release of your sound. So now it'll fade in if I decrease the attack, if I lower the sustain, or if I want a really fast release as soon as I let go, or I can have a long release and then when I let go, sticks around for a while. So you have 5 LFOs and you have 2 multi-mods, which I haven't dove in too deep into, but it can do all sorts of crazy stuff. Yeah, I haven't really explored the multi-mods too much or this whole math section. I'll be honest, I don't even really know what this math section does. It looks crazy, so it's a little bit beyond me at this point, but there is more to explore if you are curious about this world. And finally, the macros. So typically you'll see more macros than 5. I think these 5 macros are meant to really coincide with the Roli MIDI controllers, or specifically the Seaboard Rise or the Songmakers Kit like I have here, because on my Songmakers Kit, you can have the XY pad, which as you see, as I move my finger, it's adjusting those macros automatically, or I can switch the mode really quick and then have the 3 faders that correspond to those 3 other macros, which will affect the sound in various ways. And if I go into an MPE enabled preset, EDM spy chord. So let's say you have an MPE enabled preset, which are labeled in orange. Go back here, you'll notice that all these macros are already mapped to stuff. So you can really just play around with the high pass, the tone. And if I want to switch to the XY pad. So it's probably less macros than what you're used to seeing. I think typically you'll see 8. That's what you see in Ableton. You now have 16 in Ableton, which is crazy. So 5 might be on the low side, but if you have a Songmakers Kit or a Roli controller, then it's going to integrate seamlessly. Finally, let's talk about the effects tab. And I have to say that the effects is definitely an area where Equator 2 shines, because a lot of these effects are really high quality and you have a lot of versatility and flexibility with what you can do with the effects. First of all, you can use multiple instances of the same effect, which is not common amongst synths. And you can do all sorts of different routing and the effects sound great. They have multiple different kinds. So if you click here, you'll notice that it loads up all these different types of effects you can choose from. And all of these sound pretty good, but I gotta say that the distortion models, the grain delay, and the room reverb really shine out to me. So let's load up a delay. Let's turn this guy off. So there's the grain delay. Right? Pretty crazy. You can also turn on the reverb. Let's throw some of that. There's all these different kinds of reverb. So let's go with outdoor reflections. Distortions, there's all these different effects you can play with, and you can also change up the routing. You can keep it mixed where you can see if you follow the signal flow, it'll go through these top effects and then route itself through these next ones and then combine later. But you can change this. You could go to parallel, where both these effects run in parallel and then combine at the end. You can do mixed with feedback. So this gets a little bit crazy where the first row feeds back into itself and then goes through the second row. So I gotta say, with everything under the synth engines, the routing possibilities, the effects, the MPE compatibility with your Roli controller or any other MPE controller, the awesome sounding texture presets and acoustic instrument sample presets, there's a lot to be reckoned with the synth. Finally, I just want to touch on a few global things. You can use this as a standalone synth or within your DAW, so that can be handy if you ever wanted to use it just to jam out ideas or like use it in a live performance or something through your laptop. That could be really cool. So you could then change the clock to be internal or to follow something else specifically. And it has this handy little keyboard that emulates what an MPE controller would do, like this Roli Seaboard block. And you can change the scale, you can change all sorts of little articulations here and sample notes right on the plug. All right, so that wraps it up for my mini demo, my mini review of Equator 2. I personally love this plugin because I use it with my Roli controller. I really love the texture sounds. I really love the acoustic sampled instruments like I've mentioned a few times. And I love the ease of use with the MPE and the fact that you can get extremely expressive with these sounds. The presets sound great. Some I like better than others, but I gotta say all in all that this is a workhorse of a synth. I still have a lot to discover within it, but I love the sound of it. And I gotta say that it is a force to be reckoned with. Now, is this synth for you? So you gotta ask yourself, do you plan on using this for MPE? And do you want to get really deep into sound design? Because if you have an MPE controller, I would definitely consider Equator 2. It will definitely help unlock new worlds of possibility with your controller. If it's something that interests you in the future, getting an MPE controller, you might want to consider Equator 2. And also, if you want to get really deep into sound design and getting into nitty-gritty details of routing and creating your own sounds and using all the envelopes and various different oscillators and synth engines and getting into FM synthesis with the granular engine and all that kind of stuff, then definitely consider Equator 2. Or even if you're like me and you just like have an MPE controller and you're kind of more like want to rock out some of these presets and maybe change a few things, play around with macros and get some really cool sounds, it's got you covered too. On the flip side, if you're not really into MPE and you're not super into the sounds, I don't know if I would consider this a great investment for the price because it is quite steep, and you have options such as Vital to just get started, which is free, and it covers all of your bases of like what you would need for basic synthesis or basic sound design. So on that grounds, I'm not sure if it would be worth the investment if you're just looking for a new toy or if you're just looking to get into synthesis. So I don't know if I would make this recommendation if you're brand new to synthesis, if you're not into MPE, or if you're just looking for a new toy. This might be a little bit steep for just that use. But all in all, I gotta say, I love Equator 2. It's my workhorse of a synth. It's the one I probably use the most, alongside Wavetable, which is built into Ableton, which are both MPE enabled now. So I definitely use the MPE as a huge part of my workflow because I aim to like bring my expressiveness as a musician into the digital realm, into modern music production as much as possible. So that's just my personal opinion. If you're considering this, maybe check out some other demos that go more in depth with the presets and the different sounds you can achieve, maybe some of the Roli demos, and see if you really like the sound of this. And if MPE really interests you and you maybe don't have Ableton 11 yet, maybe consider getting Equator 2 as a stepping stone towards full MPE compatibility. And hey, if you're just getting started with music production or having trouble finishing projects or just want to get a glimpse inside my personal workflow, I've created a super easy to follow 7-step framework that helps you go from your very first ideas, so generating ideas, picking the best ones, composing and arranging a track, reflecting on it, editing it, and then mixing it and mastering it to get a finished product. If you're interested in that, go ahead and download it in the link below. It's super handy to have around the studio as like a reference guide to keep you on track, and a super easy framework to follow to really explore your creativity and your artistry in a whole other way. And hey, that wraps it up for this video. So let me know, do you use Equator 2? Have you considered it? Have you heard of it before? Do you think it's worth the investment? Do you think it's maybe too steep of an investment? Are you into MPE? What kind of synths do you use? Any of those questions, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. And until the next time, we'll see you in the next video.